featuring a panel discussion on sustainability and circularity. Gain exciting insights into future trends. With panelists Carla Magruder, Petri Alava, Baptiste Carrière-Pradal. Moderated by John Mowbray.
Hello everyone, I'm John Mowbray, the founder and editor of Textile News Magazine, and welcome to today's ITMAlive panel discussion on sustainability and circularity. In this webinar, we'll look at issues around moving the textile industry from a linear to a much more circular way of working. Why are we doing this? Well, around 85% of all textiles thrown away in the US, roughly 13 million tons in 2017, are either dumped into landfill or burned. Waste is a big issue. The average American has been estimated to throw away around 37 kilos of clothes every year. And it's not just Americans, it's a global issue. There's an estimated 92 million tons of textile waste is created annually. It's the equivalent to a rubbish truck full of clothes ending up in landfill sites every second. And by 2030, we are expected to be discarding more than 134 million tons of textiles every year. So the big question is not about whether we can continue along this path, but more of a discussion today around how the global industry can mitigate this growing problem around the waste it produces. And to discuss this issue today, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to our guests who are joining us, including from Milan, Carla Magruder, who is the founder and president of the new initiative Accelerating Circularity. From Finland, we have Petri Alava, who is the co-founder of Infinite Fibre. And joining us from the Netherlands is Baptiste Carrière-Pradal, who is the chair of the Policy Hub. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Carla, I was just wondering whether you could give our viewers today a short introduction about yourself and exactly what you guys are doing at Accelerating Circularity.
Sure. So I'm the founder and president, as John had said, of Accelerating Circularity. I've been in the textile industry for 35 years, actually probably a little bit more at this point in time. And we're really have this initiative. Accelerating Circularity is a nonprofit based in the United States. And our goal is to divert textiles from a landfill and incineration to specifically use the embedded value in those materials for textile to textile circular systems. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, great stuff, Carla. We'll obviously go into that a lot deeper during this discussion. And then on to Petri. Could you give us a bit of an insight into Infinite Fibre and yourself, Petri, and your experience in the industry?
Yeah, happy to do so. Compared to Carla, I'm just a newcomer in this industry. I started working here in 2015. Prior to that, I was a corporate CEO in a global biomaterials business, solving different kind of problems, and before that in global robotics business. I founded in 2015 Infinite Fibre together with Professor Ali Harley. And the company is a fashion and textile technology company, powerhouse, and we have created a technology which can turn different trashes like post-consumer textile waste into brand new fibers, which looks soft and natural like cotton.
Okay, sounds very interesting, and I'm sure we'll peel back a few layers on that technology as we discuss the issues around circularity in our industry. And okay, Baptiste, finally, could you give us a bit of an update about the Policy Hub and what work you're doing, especially around circularity in our industry?
Yes, thank you, John. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. So I'm Baptiste Carrière-Pradal. I'm the chair of the Policy Hub. The Policy Hub now is an organization which has been founded 3 years ago with the aim to be able to bring back all of the industry together when it comes to making contribution to the European Commission, as the European Commission aims at regulating the way that the industry deals with circularity as part of their circular economy action plan. So many regulations are being worked upon that will affect every single aspect of how a product is designed, manufactured, discarded, and marketed. I will come back on that later. And therefore, we really try to make sure that we can come with progressive ideas, recognizing that those regulations will be very keen, very impactful for our sectors, and really help us to potentially move forward. And on the side, I also happen to be the chair of the Technical Secretariat of the European Product Environmental Footprint Project, aiming at calculating and agreeing on one single way to measure environmental performance of product. And before that, 10 years, so I used to be working at Decathlon, to be heading sustainability in Decathlon, and worked in different production countries.
Thanks ever so much for that, Baptiste. I think, so in this webinar, I think one of the first things that we should talk about and look at is exactly why the textile industry needs to move towards a circular way of doing business. And what does circularity actually mean for our industry and the people and the viewers who are watching this webinar now? Will the textile sector simply be going around in circles trying to achieve circularity, given existing linear business models work for the vast majority of the textile sector, especially when it comes to commercial realities? So looking and thinking about the reasons why we are starting to address this issue now, and to help set the scene and put this discussion into context, I'd like to start with you, Baptiste, and ask you, why do you think the current way of linear model is the wrong way for the textile industry to continue? And why is there now a more urgent need to increase the pace of change towards a more circular way of working?
Thank you, John. So in your introduction, you have already outlined the very intense impact of these linear models. I don't have to come back about the environmental impact regarding carbon, water, and any other indicators that those linear models are producing on the industry. So to answer that, I will, of course, take the angle to tell to our listeners about the political angle of it. If we look today at the understanding that our societies have of the impact of the environmental sector, this impact is not accepted anymore. So that means that our customers and then our citizens started to make huge pressure towards policymakers and others to make sure that our industry can move from a linear model to a circular one. And therefore, that means that plethora of regulation are currently in the pipeline that will have a direct impact on all of the operations of all of the people in the value chain and will really make them have a dramatic change. If we look at other sectors, this happened to other sectors actually. So if we look at, for instance, the automotive industry, we know that at some point in time, the type of emissions of the car was not accepted, not so much by the consumers, but by the citizens. And hence drastic regulation were implemented. That meant that today we see a complete revolution in those value chain. And for the manufacturers that stick on the reality, and you talked about the commercial viability of the explosion engine, and we're making critical part of those explosion engines, they know that in a few years, they will very likely be out of orders, and that their orders will inevitably go down simply because the regulation implemented will not allow for the sales of such engines in the future. And this is exactly what we see happening for the textile sector. We have now a full array of regulations which are being discussed that will mean that the way that we produce the good, that we market them, that we discard them, will have to change because consumers/citizens have said to their policymakers, enough, we want the textile sector to come to a circular one. So we see that happening. And when we look at the current regulation, if I was to sketch quickly a bit the upcoming regulation that will be critical, we have the conversation happening on the Sustainable Product Policy Initiative, which is a bundle of requirements that will directly have potential technical, physical requirement on product, how durable a product should be, how many washes a product should withstand, what's the color fastener threshold that should be required to put a product on the market. You can have very likely requirements regarding the recycled fiber content in products or per producers putting product on the EU market. We are discussing carbon threshold of product to be allowed to enter to the market, meaning we talk here about hard regulations and things that will be definitely needed should anybody want in the future to sell to the markets. There is regulation happening in conversation regarding due diligence that will directly require also people to be much more aware and accountable for the environmental impact that happens in their value chain and in their own operations. There is conversation also strengthening the requirement to be able to make any environmental claims that, again, we know that consumers now are very eager to understand and hear better. So ending greenwashing, so putting the bar even higher to be able to communicate about the environmental performance of a product. And there is also strong regulation happening on waste and EPR. So therefore, drastically changing also the way that people can either collect or deal with waste, and the requirements that our industry will have again to be able to take back the waste that is generating. So we see that the regulation will definitely tackle all of the different life cycle technically of a product, exactly like a legal LCA happening on our sector. And this will have a drastic impact on what we'll be doing.
Okay, well, that's a compelling reason for textile producers and textile mills who are watching this broadcast to really start to engage in what's going on at a political level and a legislative level, especially in Europe. But the question I suppose they'll need to think about is, how do we start on this journey? You know, I mean, what are some of the first things that we need to do? And this is a good opportunity to bring in Carla, the founder of the Accelerating Circularity Initiative, which was launched in 2019, I think. Carla, the logic for moving to circularity is all about reducing global and environmental and social impacts. And we've heard from Baptiste just then about what's potentially happening in Europe. But I know that you and your organisation are now conducting trials in the USA, where circularity is also starting to come on the agenda. And you're working with the likes of GAP and VF Corporation to collect, source and recycle waste clothes in a bid to ramp up textile to textile circularity to commercial scale. Could you give our viewers a bit of a roundup about this project perhaps, and what you're doing on the ground at the manufacturing level, and whether you think it's going to be possible to achieve these types of changes in the sort of ambitious timescales that policymakers and legislators are thinking about? What are your thoughts on that, Carla?
Well, accelerating circularity is hopefully doing the kinds of things that Baptiste is doing in the policy, where as many of the actors as possible from a circular systems perspective. So it wasn't just the brands that we brought together, but also fiber producers, recyclers, collectors, sorters. We're really excited that in the US project, so we identify a region and call that region a project, because there's regionality to the work that we're doing. And we're very excited that in the United States, we're actually moving to trials. And to do that, what we did is we pulled together all these actors and found out what it was that everybody wanted, what everybody needs. We look at this from a circular systems perspective, right? It can't be just one element in itself. And so as we're going into trials, we've gotten very specific in terms of what those products are. We're working on T-shirts in both cotton and polyester and blends. We're looking at jeans, and we're looking at some home textile products. The idea behind the trials that we're working with now is that they'll be complete by the end of 2022. I mean, that was the original plan. We know with what's going on and with supply chains being difficult, it has the potential to be a challenge to hit those target dates. But we believe that it is critical that we move quickly so that we can meet the requirements that are coming along from a policy standard, and also too that we're meeting requirements just based on what the industry needs and what our environment needs. We are also looking to do this. These are not capsule collections. They are, as close to standard minimums that the collectors, sorters need, that the fiber producers need, that the yarn spinners need. So we're talking to the brands and retailers around 10,000 units per style. Some of them are going to go higher. And certainly part of this is so that we can accelerate the movement towards a circular system.
Okay. That's great. So we can talk a little bit more about that, later in this discussion as well. I've got a few additional questions for you on that. But quickly, I'd like to bring in Petri Alava from Infinite Fibre here, because you're working right at the cutting edge in terms of innovation around raw materials, Petri, when it comes to circularity, essentially producing high quality textile fibres from trash. Could you let our viewers know about how your business fits in with this move towards circularity that Carl is working on? So if you could briefly outline what your company does, why, and potentially some of the things that you're working on now and some things that will be happening in the next 12 months or so.
There are, first of all, a lot of similarities to what Carlisle is doing and what Infinite Fibre is doing. We probably work much more on a tech side as we are chemical engineers and technology geeks, creating new technology. What we do really is that we take in textile waste, for example, post-consumer textile waste. We can also use cardboard waste as a feedstock, and we use responsible chemistry to turn those trash streams into high-quality new textile fibers, which look natural and soft like cotton. We call the fiber Infina, as it's made from cellulose. It's really fully biodegradable, also in marine conditions, and there are no microplastics releases. It's also, as it's a brand new fiber, we don't really call it recycled, it's regenerated fiber. So it's really a plug and play system into an existing textile industry supply chain. So you can spin fibers out of the fiber without any complications. It performs exactly the same like cotton or viscose or other cellulosic fibers. And we've been doing a number of tests with the world's leading brands. You can make, first of all, 100% circular yarns from the fiber, as well as 100% circular fabrics out of it. And we've been very happy to test the materials with the world's leading brands in huge number of applications like t-shirts or hoodies or denim, or then also more demanding, like say woven fabrics, say women dresses or men's shirts. The shirt what I'm wearing is also made from our fiber. And what we see really essentially is that, as Patrick was speaking about the systems change. So what we see, the core of it is that the materials made of circular materials, they first of all need to be on a par on quality and feeling to the kind of virgin materials, because let's face the fact that the consumers are relatively lazy. And if the consumer needs to be making as a compromise, I don't personally believe it will happen. So the consumers need to be feeling that the circular materials are kind of feeling normal, that they are of good quality, what they are used to. And we're very happy that, say, we've been testing the material with the world's leading brands, that they feel so. The consumers are also stating that the Infina or the materials made and garments made from Infina are just feeling great, like normal. And we see that's really the core of the systematic change to make it easy for consumers, as well as the brands, so that they don't need to be making kind of any compromise when they make designs or different applications or garments for the consumers. And initially, that was really the reason why I set it up the company together with Ali, as we saw that there was a enthusiasm from the industry. And if there's one problem, what we see today is that the brands are getting very passionate. And the remaining problem is the time. They'd like to see these solutions coming to and entering to the market today rather than in 2 years' time. And unfortunately, as this is about chemical processes, so it's taking a bit to kind of build up the factories and getting up the volume.
Yeah. So at the moment, you're operating at pilot scale, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that Zalando has recently made an investment into your business, and along with a couple of other retailers as well, with the hope and the expectation that you'll be able to scale this up. I think Textile News reported recently that the scale-up costs of the new facility will be in the region of 220 million euros, so a significant investment. How did you convince retailers to get involved?
Yes, I think that, let's say, it is just the systematic testing with them. So since 2015, we did realize that it would be kind of easy to work with, let's say, Finnish brands like Marimekko's, but they're just far too small. So we understood that in order to really get a systematic change in this industry, we need to be working with, let's say, very demanding brands who are used to high volumes like H&M's or Adidas's. And we just been systematically engaging those people and their supply chain. So we've been systematically testing our fiber with their suppliers, manufacturers, getting the feedback, improving the material. And as we've been now seeing that they are super happy with the collections they are releasing to the markets, testing. They're also getting very positive feedback from their manufacturers that the kind of processability of the fiber is meeting the industry standards. So there seems to be a excellent level of confidence that we have reached the level of being ready for scaling. So I think that's been one of the logics. And you're absolutely right that, let's say, we are in the process of now building and planning the commercial scale factory. It's a huge step. 220 million euro investment is not kind of walking the park for a early stage company, but as we have that confidence from the strategic investors, H&M's, Adidas, Zalando, that's of course convincing the financial investors also to jump on board.
Okay, and I think the capacity is slated to be something around 30,000 metric tons per year, which brings me to a point about securing the raw materials in order to make these new fibres, and perhaps looking at especially European legislation, and maybe Baptiste might want to comment upon this about legislation that's going to come on stream. Saying that textiles need to be collected separately in Europe by 2025 in order, I guess, for them to be used in a more sustainable way and for them to avoid landfill and incineration. But what sort of challenge is it for you, Petri, in terms of securing that enough raw material in order to meet those types of volumes? And perhaps, Baptiste, is that a challenge in itself, sort of harmonising these collection points across the European Union, for example, in order to allow a good quality supply of textiles to be available, to be recycled and turned again into textiles? And maybe you, Carla, have also got a view on that in terms of securing the raw material supply, because if we don't have a supply of raw materials, a regular quality supply of raw materials, this whole thing is going to be much more difficult. So I just wondered if anybody's got any thoughts on that.
Well, we certainly do, but I'll let Baptiste go talk about the policy part of that first.
Okay, so therefore, quickly on the policy part, you, John, have already mentioned the key element, kind of the initiator of this entire cycle, that will be the waste directive that already requires for all of the waste in Europe to be collected and sorted. That means that all of the municipalities have the obligation by 2025 to indeed collect and sort. And therefore, that means that suddenly Europe will be sitting on huge piles of waste. And hence the question, what do I do with all of that? That's also why so many regulations now are coming up to be able to make sure that it will be brought back. And hence what I was talking earlier regarding discussion about thresholds of recycled. I will now have to add maybe regenerated fibers in the mix. But in order to do that, you need to have a harmonized EPR system. Very quickly, EPR is extended product responsibility. Every country has many countries in Europe are discussing right now to define for each sector, and typically for the textile sector, a system upon which the industry and local authorities can come together to understand, what do I do with all of this waste? Is the waste of the textile sector going back to the textile sector into the factory or pettry? Or is the municipality thinking, no, actually, I want the waste that I'm collecting to go back to construction, because I think that it should be used to isolate different elements. So there is here a big question that's happening right now about what will be the overall policy that will be implemented regarding the direction of all of this waste collected. To this end, there is a lot of conversation where, for instance, we think that in order to be an opportunity and not a challenge. We need to have all of those systems, all of those EPR scheme to be completely harmonized at European level, following the same targets and objectives and working towards the same goals. So we really believe that it's only by creating that then we can make of all of this waste a real opportunity that can feed into our sector, and that ultimately our sector can really properly define industrially how it wants to close the loop, and not by having the waste being diverted to other sectors. So that's the key element of it. There are some countries like France who already have decades now virtually of experience regarding EPR system, and we look a lot at what's happening there in order to be able to duplicate some of their benefits, while definitely building up on the challenges that they have faced. That's one of the key element of the regulation that is happening. Plus, as I mentioned, the mandatory usage of recycled content moving forward. And after, there is also another element which is a bit more, I will not say technical, but which is to say that when we talk about waste, there is a lot of conversation about how legally do you define waste, how we can make sure that what's called waste in one section has the same definition, has the same quality, has the same ingredients or composition from one place to another. So first, there is a need to agree on what is defined as waste as a challenge. And then the final challenge is that once you agree on what's waste, there is a lot of regulation being implemented within the Europe and outside regarding how free waste can circulate. Some countries don't want to receive the waste of others for many reasons. But therefore, that means that sometimes if you have a factory that needs this waste to be able to survive, or wants to build an ecosystem around the waste coming from different places, we really need to recognize waste as a resource. But for that means also a change of many regulation that sometimes hamper the capacity of waste to travel freely from country to country and continent to continent. So harmonized definition of waste, harmonized targets and definition of the EPR schemes, and a free flow of the waste to make sure that we can become really circular. So that some of the challenges, and if answered, will become the opportunity for us.
That's great. It sort of leads into exactly, it's great to have all three of us on here because everybody's coming at this from a different perspective. As Baptiste talks about the need to have a definition for waste so that we can create flows of that, there are some other things that also might support and change this. So, I love what Petri's company is doing. It's fantastic, especially it's got the cotton hand. I think they're way out above. But Petri's system isn't, John, to your point, going to work without the feedstocks. And just like the traditional textile industry, and sometimes I hesitate to harken back to that too much, but the truth is they're going to need, like any business, the ability to obtain on a regular basis quality, volume, price, and delivery of their feedstocks. And to do that today, those systems and that technology also is not in place. So while the textile industry, the fashion folks, we get real excited about a new fiber, we also need to get real excited about other technologies, which is, makes me think that for us to have this conversation in front of machinery suppliers and technology developers, we need systems that can accurately identify fibers. That's a really big issue. I happen to know Petri's team is also struggling with that as well. So you need to identify what those fibers are. You need to be able to sort them. And you also need to be able to, remember, we're talking about post-consumer materials. So we're talking about materials that have on it labels, zippers, buttons, threads. And often if you want a cotton product and those threads are polyester, you can't have those in the system either. They all have to be cut out. What are the technologies that are going to allow us to do that? So we really, when we're talking about circularity, at accelerating circularity, we are really clear that we're always talking about the whole system and trying to engage all the parts of it so that we understand what's going in and coming out of each step. I will say that in our group, we work with both mechanical and chemical recycling. And the reason behind that is we need to get the system moving. And to get the system moving, we have to give everybody a business case for changing what they're doing today. Today, the people that are collecting and sorting are selling it into the secondhand market. Well, when this flood of material comes after the 2025 directive, they may not have those same type of markets, right? They're going to need to put that material someplace else. hopefully as a feedstock to these new technologies. And we use the term spent textiles because we don't want it to be addressed as waste. We want it to be addressed as a resource. And changing it potentially from just secondhand material to a feedstock that can go into a process like Petri's would also, in some instances, help with the regulations that Baptiste is trying to develop. So there's a lot to do. We've got to look at it from a systems. And the other thing that we have, when we say we have to look at it from a system, we have to do this all at the same time, which is not something we like to do as humans. I jokingly say we've got to birth the whole system at once. You can't birth an arm and a leg, you got to birth the whole body.
Great point. And that's, I mean, we were speaking earlier before we started recording with Petri about he had a great process there and they had some great chemistry. And they were at ITMA in 2019, which resulted in a partnership with a technology provider. One of the, you mentioned then, Carla, that the technology to do a lot of this is still not quite there yet. And a lot of the potential technology providers may not be aware that this is a potential new market for them. So I just wondered, Petri, if you could give us a bit of an overview of how you managed to attract Andritz, a leading textile machinery producer, to partner up with you for your process.
So as a matter of fact, when it comes to the equipment manufacturers, it really hasn't been that difficult as we haven't been inventing any new equipment. So as our technology consists, first of all, as a kind of cleaning the raw material feedstock. When you're dealing with the waste materials, you need to be removing kind of components what you are not able to work with. So in our case, we are removing polyester, nylon, elastane, and so forth. Also the dyes. And in that process, for example, we are just using very standard Andritz equipment, what they are using in pulp mills. Okay. And the same also when it comes to the fiber processing module, we are using the viscose manufacturing equipment. So our technology, a combination of different technologies, and in that respect, it really hasn't been difficult. But when discussing about collaboration and needed partnerships, one is definitely what Carla was mentioning. It's about, let's say, on the kind of not collection side, but sorting side. The sorting technology needs to be still kind of improved, recognition of different materials, as it really doesn't make any sense on us taking in 100% polyester, because our technology is working primarily on cellulosic materials. So kind of the sorting systems need to be improved in order to take, first of all, the valuable particles away from there. Are also valuable pieces from garments which have a resale value. So why to break those down on the molecular level? There's no sense. So that's one thing. And then recognizing different materials. As such, when Baptiste and Carla were speaking about the kind of waste collection system, that is definitely something which needs improvement. And let's say, I have a bit of background of working as a chairman of the board for in the waste management industry, and seeing the change or how fast the change can be is amazing. As when I started, the landfilling rate in Finland was about 60%. When I ended my 5-year journey, the landfilling rate was 3%. And why did that change happen was exactly what Baptiste was mentioning. It was about kind of legal frame changing. So it was the system, European legislation was banning landfilling. And we just found out the solutions to recycle and also incinerate the kind of waste, which was earlier a landfill. So that helps a lot. Then the other thing, let's say, the systematic change, what it really means that we need to be working with the kind of world's leading brands and their supply chain. That's the thing what needs to be changing. And let's say what brands need to be learning is that how to work also with the kind of tier 4 suppliers, which are fiber producers, because today they are primarily working with the tier 1 suppliers, which is the RMG industry, but they need to be also learning that what's the impact of fiber and how the fibers are made, because it's not, the sustainability is not that much about only that what's the fiber type, that how you are making the fiber, whether you are using coal-based energy or whether you are using renewable energy. So it has also a massive impact on the sustainability.
Okay, then. There's so much more we could have talked about. We could have talked about this for hours, actually, because it is really a hot topic at the moment in our industry. But speaking briefly then about technology and ITMA, I just wanted to ask you all three of you. The next ITMA takes place in Milan in June 2023. It's an event that takes place every 4 years. So I just wanted to ask you, when ITMA takes place again in 2027, after the 2025 directive in Europe, for example, what would you consider as successful progress for our industry on circularity and sustainability in another 6 years' time? Quite a bit of a tough question, but give it your best shot.
I will quickly start by saying that today many of the developments around sustainability are still led by voluntary initiative, and it's still few front-runners which are starting to find new solutions. It's still piloted, it's being developed, there is still developments happening. So by 2027, normally, that means that all of those pilots will have come to maturity, that they will be displayed in such a way, they will already have been normally scaled in a way that will be at least used in a very common ways. And by the time also, coming back to the voluntariness, everything will be regulated in such a way that we will already have had normally by 2027, the change in the legal framework at least. Maybe not all of the pieces of the system, but at least this piece will have completely changed, therefore giving a clearer direction so that everybody can move jointly to the point of Carla, not only piece by piece, but where all of the industry will be aligned towards one direction altogether.
You agree with that, Carla?
Absolutely. We're very impatient. I've been called an impatient person a number of times. And so I really believe that by 2027, we'll be able to identify fibers, we'll be able to sort them appropriately, get them into the system so that there is the quality, price, delivery, and logistics around being able to produce these products, these circular products at scale. We don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's right. And where do you think your company will be in 2027, Petri?
Yes, what we just see is that there's a huge imbalance between the impatience of the brands and willingness of the brands to start using new circular materials, and where is the kind of industry's willingness to invest or say readiness to invest today. We've been taking the brave move on building our own factory, but we are a technology geek, so we are licensing the technology, and now the brands are pushing us to go straight to the manufacturers, together with them, convincing the industry that it's the right time to start investing on real scale and start building a global manufacturing of the sustainable fibers.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke with one of our investors at Ecotextile News a few months ago on a podcast for Ecotextile Talks. We spoke with Kate Heine, the Director of Sustainability at Zalando, and she was saying that on her platform, the number of people looking for a sustainability attribute for an item of clothing they buy has increased absolutely substantially. I think it's from about 30% to 60% for certain categories of clothing in the last 18 months, or since actually just before the beginning of the pandemic. So we can see this is a situation that's moving quite quickly and urgently, and a very interesting place for visitors to ITMA who are unfamiliar with circularity to really start now looking at how their businesses can adapt to this new way of working. So with that, I'd like to wrap up now and say thanks ever so much for joining us on this ITMAlive broadcast. Good luck with everything that you're doing. Keep us informed, and perhaps we'll see you all in Milan in 2023.